Welcome to Malcolm and We, heard on malcolmpresents.com, a streaming platform, heard round the world and beyond. And as I always say, in Brooklyn also. That's where I'm originally from.
There you go.
And I'm Malcolm Berman, your host, and your co-host is Jana Larson. Jana, please introduce our guest.
Certainly. Jordan Gruber, JD, is a versatile writer and editor with a broad range of experience across psychology, spirituality, finance, and personal development. He co authored Your Symphony of Selves with Dr. James Fadiman, PhD, in 2020 and contributed to the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, having been close friends with Fadiman since 1990. With a background in law, holding degrees from Binghamton University and the University of Virginia School of Law, Gruber has also authored, ghostwritten, and edited over a dozen books. He is the founder of the enlightenment.com website and currently lives in Menlo Park, California with his family. His newest book is out that he wrote with James Fadiman, and it is called Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance. Microdosing is fast becoming a safe and powerful tool for working with all sorts of health situations as well as performance. This is largely thanks to the scientific research Dr. Feynman and Jordan have brought forth for useful approaches to a variety of common stressors in mental and physical health and living life in these modern day times. Welcome, Jordan.
Oh, what a great introduction. Thank you so much. And it is Dr. Fadiman, James
Oh,
Fadiman.
I'm
And
sorry.
I want to put the context of this book that we've just written on microdosing in the broader context of the work I've been doing for most of my life. Back in junior high school, I was a big fan of all things PSI, or the whole world of psychic phenomena and events, and I started reading the literature. By the time I was in college, I had played with psychedelic drugs, and that became part of the background. I also went through a phase where I became part of the pagan movement, called ourselves neo-pagans, and got introduced to the goddess and ritual in a very different way. And then I got involved in men's work. I'm still in a very committed, amazing group, a men's group. And all along the way, I've always been interested in human potential. When I was in college, I was volunteering for Ralph Nader. At one point, I thought politics, as usual, can't help us. It has to be about unleashing human potential. So while I've had a conventional career writing for the financial services industry, and I wrote a whole bunch of thousands of pages of legal encyclopedia articles on forensic law and audio, what I've always been most interested in is all the different tools and techniques and teachings and teachers that show people how to transform their situation, heal their situation. And underneath all of that is the idea of unleashing human potential. So in the last 5 to 10 years, I've given up most of my conventional writing practice, no more financial people. Well, some of that was fine, and I did good work. And one of the books I wrote, I co-authored with a Canadian woman, was about rebound exercise, jumping up and down on a small mini trampoline, which I've been doing since 2002, pretty much every day, because it's so much fun and it's so effective. And I could talk about
Even
bouncing.
your joints, even like your
What?
back.
Oh yeah, because it takes 80% of the weight off of your bones and off of your cartilage. So rebounding is very healing. It's good for the lymph movement. I get sick a lot less. That's one of my things because it's the easiest, most fun form of exercise I've ever encountered. So I was involved with that for a while, but now I have my own coach and I've stepped back, but I love rebounding. And then from 2015 to 2020, Jim and I wrote this book, Your Symphony of Selves. In some ways, this book is more important than the newer book on microdosing, but it's a harder proposition. The idea that everybody has a set of different subpersonalities or selves that are quite real and that you sort of move in and out of, and depending on which one you're in or not, you're a very different person. If you work with that, life can become a lot easier. And there's more complicated versions. You may have heard of internal family systems or psychosynthesis or voice dialogue, but ours is very simple, and it's just really getting people to realize that mental health is being in the right mind at the right time, and you have a lot of ability about which part of you address things in, and this gives you the ability to be much more compassionate towards other people as well.
Yeah, have you ever read Deepak Chopra?
Sure. I've interviewed Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, because I have this book. In fact, when you're showing books, uh,
Right.
can you see it?
Yeah, I've got that book. Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Does he talk about selves in that book?
it talks about getting into yourself, into I forget the chakra, the energy that you have, and when you go into
Right. But
meditating.
yeah, you
Well,
have
another
seven chakras and so different cells you'll be
Yeah,
moving in and out of. Yeah, Jean Houston talks about this stuff explicitly also. She's been on selves for years.
And then there's
So,
a physiological concept of the backstage self and the front stage self. In sociology, you have different
well,
personality traits that go with
yeah,
that.
that's right. I mean, the person I am right now talking to you guys is not the person I am when I'm with my oldest friend and we're sitting around. And that's different than if I'm hanging out with my daughter or if I'm with my daughter and her
yeah.
friends. And I'm definitely like, and it's good that we shift and we move. So we just question what we're calling the single self assumption that you are or ought to be a single self. And when you let go of that and realize that when you're in a different self, you might really do things that the other parts of you don't agree with. And this is also very useful for all sorts of trauma therapy and also very useful if you're in a psychedelic state, either high dose or low dose. So the reason I bring that up in addition to the trampolining is again, for me, understanding yourselves and that conventional psychology has it wrong. They say if you think you have more than one self, you're pretty much crazy or it's schizophrenia. And it's just not so. Everyone I've ever met has these different selves that they move in and out of. So that's the second thing I've been working on. And now I'm working on microdosing because this is Jim Fadiman has been in the psychedelics and world since 1961 when his teacher Richard Alpert or Ram Dass gave him his first dose of psilocybin in Paris in 1961. So Jim has had a 45-year career in psychedelics before he ever even heard of microdosing, which was 15 years ago. So now he's got a 60-year career. Microdosing is only the last 1/4 of that. And Jim, like everybody else he knew, pretty much was not at all interested in these tiny doses. They wanted the transcendent doses, the see God doses, the be eaten by anaconda doses.
As breathing.
Yeah, the Terence McKenna lies. So, and even when Jim in the 60s did a series of experiments on creativity with scientists and engineers, where something like 41 out of 44 solved very difficult problems on a moderate dose, that was still what we would call a macrodose. So he hears about microdosing in 2009. And by 2010, he's starting to ask the people he knows, do you know anything about this? Have you tried this? Does it work? Is it real? And people started giving him reports back. And then he started, at the talks he was at, he would bring it up and mention it. And then he wrote a chapter in his 2011 book. And this kind of got more people bringing him stories. And then reporters got interested. And then the idea that people in Silicon Valley were microdosing because it helped them with their coding. That all kept going all the way up till Ayelet Waldman wrote a book called A Really Good Day, which she wouldn't have done if she hadn't talked with Jim, and credits him. And then Michael Pollan features him in his How to Change Your Mind Netflix video.
And you have a Superman cup.
Oh, I do have a Superman cup. Thank you. And we can all have aspirations, right? So all along the way, it's like if you saw the movie Dune, there's a thumper that they put in the sand and it draws the sandworm. Well, it's just a steady signal. So Jim has created a steady signal without a lot of noise. And what we found now is that microdosing has promise for treating something like 35 or 40 different physical and mental health conditions, from ADHD and depression to long COVID, chronic pain, and shingles. And at the same time, it's also being used by people who are interested in enhanced performance. And what that means is art, creativity, sports, marathon running. We know from ultra marathon runners, we talked to one of our friends who's a big sports guy, that the word is out in the ultra marathoning field that microdosing makes a big difference. So it's my prediction that in every sport and creative endeavor, you will eventually see aficionados at the edges experimenting with microdosing and what it can do for them. So let me say about microdosing. Go ahead.
Now, would this be legal in sports? Because I know I did
Well,
marathons.
probably not, but they're not testing for it now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, because I
That's
did
that.
marathons and they were very, not that when I came in they didn't, test me, but the winners,
Right.
the ones in the top 10, they always
Well,
tested.
we heard from Ben Greenfield that this is going on, and Ben asked Jim, "Are they testing for it?" And he said, "Not yet."
No, the key word is yet. Now,
Well, we'll see what happens. So the thing of it is that we should say what microdosing is. It
yeah.
means to take 1/10 to 1/20th of a standard recreational dose of a number of substances, but mostly we talk about LSD, which we know people have issues with, and psilocybin, which is becoming more ubiquitous. There are other substances as well. A couple of the substances that people use are legal, but most of what we know is from psilocybin, which you can now make yourself with grow kits, and maybe not technically legal, but it's not being enforced anywhere. Um, and so you take these very tiny doses. When you're taking this kind of a tiny dose, it's not like you're getting a little bit high. You're having a little bit of a psychedelic experience. In fact, there's this cartoon that says Greg microdoses and sees God's elbow. And you can sort of see God above the clouds, and just his elbow is sticking through, and Greg sees his elbow. So it's not like that. When you're microdosing, you have no high dose psychedelic effects at all. It's sub threshold. So there's no visuals, there's no major changes in mental affect. You have no qualms about having your ordinary day. Nobody knows that you're on anything. And often you forget you've even been on a microdose. And at the end of the day, you go, "Oh, well, I've had a good day. I was a little bit kinder, and I did more reps at the gym, or I got more work done." So it's very low level. In fact, one of the ways we like to reframe it is that the standard classic psychedelic trip that people have is a kind of overdose, and that really at the medicinal level microdosing is much safer, much easier, doesn't stress people out, and in some cases has as good or maybe even better effects. So when you're microdosing, you're taking these really little doses, but you're not doing it every day. Jim Fadiman started out with a protocol or a schedule, which was on day one, day two, you're not on, and day three, you're not on, and then day four, you're on. That means in a 31-month day, you would take a microdose 11 times. The other most popular protocol is Paul Stamets. He has you on for 4 days and off for 3 days, which comes out to 19 dosing days. I don't like that as much because there's something called the second day effect. So what that means is the first day you're on the substance, you might be a little aware you're on something, like your little bit of coffee, but that's about it. The second day, you're still in a good mood. You're still more energetic. You're still in that part of you that is like happy to be in that part of you. You're still feeling it. And we have research that shows that there's the most sleep on the second night. And
Mhm.
then the third day is kind of a reset day. So I tell everybody who's interested in exploring this, if they have an actual problem, if they're working with migraine headaches, which this has been very effective for, or cluster headaches, God forbid, that they start very low, start at the lowest dose where you even begin to feel anything, and you keep to this very conservative protocol. And then after 6, 7, 8 weeks, then you take a couple of weeks off to reset the whole system.
Yeah.
So
Do you
that's
think, do you suggest that people try this on their own, or should there be some sort of supervision?
Well, it depends. The book says that everything you need to know to do this safely is you can do at home. And I'll give you an example. There's a Canadian study right now for depression using LSD at home that they have instructions, but they're doing it alone. So people are in two groups, as far as I can tell. Those who like working with coaches and therapists and at least want to journal and at least want to buy, a nice something to take them through it. And so they'll do their intention setting ahead of time and then they'll do integration. And other people who really just want to take the medicine, on the schedule and keep to that and really not that make a big a bother. A lot depends on what you like to do. So to the degree that placebo effect is always part of the picture, although we know microdosing isn't only a placebo effect. But if you're somebody who believes you have a better chance of dealing with your migraines, let's say if you're working with a coach or therapist, or even a friend who you can trust who will keep you to your schedule and just check in, then absolutely do that. But if you're somebody who can do this kind of thing on their own and you can access safe material that you like, there's no reason not to do it. That's the genius of microdosing is that, you know, maybe one person ever that we know of has died of psychedelics directly of taking a large dose. They don't kill you. They're not that kind of a thing. Um, And when you bring it down to the microdose, and that's when people are taking massive heroic doses and 100 times more than they should. When you're taking a microdose at these really low levels, it's extremely safe. People always put out the warning that if you have any schizophrenia or bipolar or you're in the middle of a major mood swing, don't do it. And likewise, in the book, we actually talk about bipolar. People ask Jim about bipolar, and because everyone says, well, you should stay away from it in this situation, we don't necessarily talk it up, but people wrote him stories anyway. And what it turned out is that people who are bipolar and who are, it used to be called manic depressive disorder. When people are in the manic phase, not a good time to microdose. Don't do it. But when they're in depressive phase, that seems to work just fine. At least those are the reports. So that's what this book is. It's mainly an assemblage of the knowledge from thousands of reports, mainly sent to Jim, but also found in Reddit. And it's also all of the known research that we've got, all put together in one place and done in a question and answer format.
Yeah, well,
So it's easy
I'm
to
a product
digest.
of the 60s and the 70s. And I
Okay.
remember when Timothy Leary came out with the LSD with acid, and kids were experimenting with it. And
Oh, yeah.
there were some very negative things. And the things which with the marijuana or cocaine and things like that, uh, which I experimented with. But the thing that I was maintained. I wanted to be in control. I never wanted to lose control. And the
Right.
problem is with the people that I know that went on acid, they lost control.
Right. And some of them actually did throw themselves off roofs.
Yeah,
That 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 actually did happen. But if you're doing a microdose, if you're at like 1/10 or less of that, it's not going to happen.
Right.
Unless you're, I mean, anything can happen to anybody
yeah,
and
right.
everybody's different. And you could be a walking powder keg and you might have had something really bad that happened. Like even that guy, the mushroom pilot, remember that guy? He took a big mushroom dose. He didn't sleep for 3 days. Then he came back to a plane. He was a part-time pilot and he got himself in the cockpit and he tried to crash the plane. But this was a guy who took a large dose, had terrible emotional stress, and hadn't slept for 3 days. So,
Mm.
people want to paint with a very broad stroke, in part because the U.S. government initiated war against drugs, put out a lot of propaganda that was never really true. But that was more of a political thing than an actual. They weren't doing it for medical and safety reasons. We know now that they were using the war on drugs to attack Nixon's enemies. Nixon talked about that, and so did
Well,
Ehrlichman.
I don't know if you ever saw it was, I think, a movie in the 40s or 50s about marijuana.
Oh, which one?
I'm forgetting the name of it. I think Tom Neal did it, and it was like he would take marijuana and become
Oh,
a
that's
maniac.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, it can happen, and of course, unfortunately, today's marijuana is not, our older brothers and sisters' marijuana. The
Or no.
stuff today has been bred so that it has a super high level of THC and almost none of the CBD or CBN or other, entourage substances that should be with there. So now we're actually seeing marijuana-induced psychosis, marijuana-induced withdrawal syndromes, and there's this thing where people who smoke too much end up feeling that they're incredibly hot and then all they want to go in scalding warm baths and stay in them as the only thing that relieves their pain. So, lots of today's high dose marijuana is not a good idea by any means.
I know about
There's a dispensary in a lot of places in Ohio and Michigan because it is legal in Ohio now, and they're very effective for all kinds of things. Like if you want something for pain or something to
Mm.
feel more energetic or more chill and whatever. And there are a lot. It's very scientific the way they have it all figured out. It's
Well,
even my mom
yeah.
had in Colorado had a frequent visitor card to the dispensary for what she would get there, which was a lotion. And I always thought that was a funny story.
Well, it makes sense that there could be a way to do it so that people could keep these different cultivars, some that are very high in CBD and some that have, and not, but it's basically marketing it because for a while, all ever anybody wanted was more THC. So the industry kind of took that seriously and, almost everything that's out there in the commercial space, at least out here, is very high in THC and almost nothing else. And that's not what I,
Oh,
that's not what I want to smoke if I'm going to smoke something. It's just too,
right.
you know, anyway.
Too.
yeah, just
And also, Go ahead.
I was going
I'm
to
just,
ask you, you had your website that you were talking about.
Oh yeah, you can learn more about the book and find where to buy it that isn't Amazon at Microdosing Book, one word, microdosingbook.com. So just microdosingbook.com, and you can submit questions, you can submit stories. We're hearing stories about new things that are blowing our socks off. This guy has had, since he was 4, he's had 40 surgeries, and he's been in terrible pain his whole life. And then he finally decided to try microdosing in a different way than we've been doing. He takes a little LSD and psilocybin every day, and he says no pain. And he showed us his X-rays and showed us the list of his surgeries, and it's just like, oh my gosh. So
you did
like
what?
that's not our protocol to take both of them every day, but you know, people are discovering things like the people who are doing shingles figured out that when they have an active outbreak, they have to take it several times a day, at least a few times a day, and that's not
It
part of the
calms
protocol
your nerves
either.
down because that's what causes shingles, right?
Well,
Is
so
the
the
nerve?
thing about so why microdosing works, we really don't know, right? But what we can say is we know for sure it enhances neuroplasticity. So your brain, your neurons and populations of neurons are more able to connect to each other in a different way, and that includes neurons throughout the whole body. We know that the classic psychedelics, at least, are strong anti-inflammatories. It's because of how they work with the serotonin system, but there's other things going on also. And we also know that microdosing brings people back to homeostasis or equilibrium. So they have a they feel better. Or an example, somebody with a lot of pain said, "You know what? I still have the pain, but it's not all of who I am. I'm mainly back in me." So which actually relates a lot to, the earlier book I mentioned, Your Symphony of Selves. So people, physiologically and mentally and emotionally seem to move into a better part of who they are. We're also thinking it might affect mitochondria. There's research noise bubbling up around the edges on that. And ultimately, it's
What's mitochondria? Forget.
mitochondria are the little power cells inside of every cell in your body, and the older you get, the less well they work. You might have remembered the Madeline L'Engle series, The Wind at the Door. On that whole
Yeah.
series, she has Charles Wallace go down to the level of the mitochondria in the book and deal with what's wrong with them. It was really fun. But so we don't know, and it's really because we base most of what we're doing on citizen science, people submitting reports, and us just saying, as far as what we can tell, here's what people are discovering and experiencing. We like that there's more and more science. Like there was one on neural complexity that shows without a doubt that it's not just a placebo anymore. That done by a guy named Connor Murray. So we're collecting all the science, but even as we were finishing the book, more science was coming in every week that we had to keep trying to stop the presses for. And like 50% or more of all the science that's ever been done has been done in the last 2 years. So
Yeah.
we're excited about the possibility that microdosing, because it's so safe, so effective, and so easy, will spread.
Yeah, I'm going through a process now. Uh, well, I'm going to be 82. So, uh,
You look good.
no, thank you. But but I've for the last year or so I've had problems with my legs get tired
Uh-huh.
and I'm a little dizzy. So
Yeah.
finally, and I've been resisting taking any pills, but the doctor said it might be pre-Parkinson's.
Hmm.
Ooh.
So no, so now they want to give me something called dopamine. It
Uh-huh.
is not the full name, but it's supposed to release something, the
Oh, yeah, it's another
dopamine in
it
your
affects your
brain.
neurotransmitter system with
Right. I'm
dopamine, right?
wondering whether you could do that with
Okay, so a lot of the book actually does focus on pharmaceuticals and how microdosing differs, which is that pharmaceuticals pretty much only suppress symptoms, while microdosing actually helps heal the body. Now, the problem with pharmaceuticals is that once you're on it, you can't just go off them right away
hmm.
because there are almost always terrible side effects. Note that microdosing has pretty much zero side effects, except some people have a little stomach queasiness or can't sleep as well, and they have to lower their dose. So if you take the pharmaceutical, microdosing could help because it will support the rest of your body at the same time. And we talk a lot about tapering off of a pharmaceutical with the help of the prescribing physician while you are using microdosing to support people doing that. We've had a lot of reports that it's a lot easier to taper off if people are also microdosing at that time.
Yeah, I think what I thing that the thing that the side effects of the taking the dopamine, they say you can hallucinate and
Yeah.
you can hear voices. And I'm going, oh
Well,
my God.
so I mean, probably you'll get a little folded up piece of paper and it'll actually have a list of about 50 possible
Oh
side
yeah.
effects.
Aside from
And
sudden death.
right, and the sudden death. So that's the way kind of pharmaceuticals are. Human beings did not grow up and co-evolve with pharmaceuticals. It's a very specific symptom suppress. It's like going into a complex mechanical thing and fixing just one part of the process. Generally speaking, microdoses don't work that way. And having a microdosing practice where you're on every, third day and you learn how to harness the neuroplasticity, it's like, oh yeah, I'm a little bit more aware and awake. I want to stay away from, let's say, listening to too much news right now because that'll bum me out and I'll kind of lock that in while I'm in this neuroplastic state. I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll go out in nature instead. I mean, it's a different way of going at things. And the thing about microdosing is that less is enough. It's just a really very small amount of, if you're psilocybin, it's a totally natural substance. And by the way, actually, real psilocybin extract from whole mushrooms works better than synthesized psilocybin, which Albert Hofmann, who synthesized LSD, also came up with. And it's because it's got all these other entourage chemicals that go with it. So, I mean, the theory is that human beings evolved eating small amounts of psilocybin. That's one idea. Terence McKenna's and Dennis's the stone ape hypothesis. So, it's very different. And indigenous peoples around the world have been taking small amounts of their psychedelics,
Oh
including
yeah.
the women and the children, for back into pre-recorded history.
Do you do any private tutoring or private advice to people? Let's say I would come to you and told you my problem, and would you do any sort of uh, to do a microdosing schedule for me or any
You
individual?
know, I I'm not a coach and I don't do that professionally. Now, if you call yourself a coach, you don't have to have any kind of licensure, right? So that's why people are coaches. So I know a lot of coaches, and there's any number of people I could recommend to you. And some are high dose people, some are low dose, and most of them, are happy to work online with people. So,
Doctors,
there are doctors who are tuned in and medical doctors who will help you and participate. The problem with doctors, I'm not saying this is a real problem, but and certainly there are many exceptions, is that even those who are into it want to bring in the high dose with a therapist model that maps. The big organization trying to get psilocybin legalized in USA, they had a study that was rejected by the US FDA in June for using high doses with therapists for veterans with PTSD. There were problems. There were some sexual escapades. They didn't like the way the blinding. It's very hard to blind a psychedelic study ever, and they didn't like that, and so it was rejected. But we've talked to a few of the biggest psychedelic leaders, and they're still tending to think that microdosing is not if you have a serious case of treatment-resistant depression, for example. But that's not what we're finding. We're finding that treatment-resistant depression falls to microdosing. And maybe working with a coach, I'm guessing you really would. And if you want to contact me, we can talk about that and I can make you some recommendations. I'm happy to do. And I'm also happy to talk to you for 15 minutes and the book might be all you need, right? It's because I mean that's the thing, the reward to risk level with microdoses, assuming you can grow your own or find it, or you want to work with one of the legal products, which I don't want to talk about too much here online, but there's a lot of options. And generally, once people go out and ask people they know, especially if they're younger people or if they join a local psychedelic meetup or gathering group, it's not hard to find someone who will be able to get you safe, reliable substance, depending on what you need or want. And then there's also a couple of legal options that will work just as well, actually, at this point, although
Yeah.
they can be a little
How
bit
does
trickier.
marijuana fit into this?
Yeah, marijuana is, we have three classes of subjects. One is definitely not, one is definitely in, and then there's the middle where we call it, people are talking about this as microdosing parens, but it isn't really. So marijuana is in that group for two reasons. First, the neuroplasticity profile of marijuana is generally negative. It doesn't help enhance thinking and creativity. If I had started smoking when I was 14 instead of 17, I wouldn't be anywhere near as smart. We know that it's not really good for kids who smoke too much. It really does mess
well, their
up
brain's
things.
still developing.
Right. So, so it's got a different neuroplasticity. There are certain types of marijuana that if you took a very tiny toke every 3 days, you might have a tremendous creative outpouring. You could argue this is neuroplasticity, but people don't use it that way. They don't just take one toke and come back in a day or two and do another. So nobody's using it that way. The neuroplasticity profile is wrong, and most of the marijuana out there is just too high THC. So, you can say you're microdosing marijuana, but we don't think it counts because we have to draw some lines. Likewise, DMT. I don't know if you know what DMT is.
No.
DMT, I'm not going to say what it means, but it is the most potent psychedelic ever known. People have said it's like being shot out of an atomic nozzle, like it's every LSD trip you've had rolled in the head of a pin. It's 10 to 15 minutes, depending which type you're taking, and then you're done. But you see translinguistic machine elves and different dimensions, and you lose your identity completely. You will be super high if you take a real toke. So they've made vape pens now that have teeny little bits of DMT and are arguing that, just one toke on these vape pens is a microdose. And remember I talked to you about Greg's elbow in that cartoon? My experience of being in a room where a friend was dying and her son exhaled just a tiny hit of DMT, because I've had a whole dose, it's like Greg's elbow. Part of, like, all the yellow lights went off. If you take any DMT in, it's psychedelic. It's the strongest psychedelic. Sorry, it's not. And likewise, ketamine. It's a bad substance for
Yeah, yeah.
microdosing. If people get caught in it, it's highly addictive and it's a dissociative. It takes you out of who you are. One of the things about microdosing, again, to be repetitive, is that it tunes you into which part of you you're in, which part of you can be in, what your parts are, and what the parts of the people in your life are. When you see their parts or selves as sub-personalities, it's easier to love yourself and love other people. And DMT is not going to do that because you're going to be eventually you'll find yourself in the K-hole and not even able to move your body.
Anyway,
So,
Jordan, our half hour is up.
all right,
Then one more time, I'll give you one more time. How can we get your book and how can we get a hold of you or your group?
sure. The book is called Microdosing for Health, Healing, and Enhanced Performance by James Fadiman and myself through St. Martin's Essentials. The book's website is microdosingbook.com. That's one word, microdosingbook.com. And there's an audiobook read by a fantastic narrator named Hileo Griffith, as well as an ebook. And we hope you take a look. It's the hardest, most intense book I've ever written. And I'm really glad we're done and in the publicity phase now.
I'm looking forward to reading it. Anyway, thank you very much. And,
Oh,
th
thank you guys so much. This is great. I
and
appreciate
thank you for
you listening to me
joining
ramble.
us on Malcolm and We heard on malcolmpresents.com. Tell your friends about it. You should be up in a few days.
All right.
Bye.
Bye bye.